Welcome to IFAB Online. My name is Martin Kaufman. I've been in fundraising for 30 years. I've run programs for the UK's National Trust, the London School of Economics, the Hackney Empire Theatre and the Museum of London. And I was campaign director for the Terracotta Warriors exhibition at National Museums, Liverpool in 2017 to 18. Since 2013, I've worked as a strategic consultant in culture and education as the principal of Martin Kaufman Philanthropy. I have worked on overseas cultural fundraising projects that include Sweden, the Piteå School of Music, where I went up to the Arctic Circle every month for 3 years. In Switzerland, the Werner Erstlich Library. In Canada, the Royal British Columbia Museum in Vancouver. In Germany, in Munich, the Halberstadt Organ. And in the UK, when I was Director of Development of the Architectural Association, I've organized what may have been the first international alumni telephone. And I also did overseas fundraising in Hong Kong and Malaysia. And at the Museum of London, where I was Development Director, my team managed the Harcourt Group. They were an international group of donors based in London. Over 9 years, they supported the museum with 450,000 in membership subscriptions. But when you add in the extra donations and the sponsorship they gave, that 450,000 leveraged a total of £6 million for the museum. Now, we took our Harcourt patrons on tours. First of all, we had the director's tours. We went to Berlin, Moscow, Havana, Damascus, and Vienna. Here's a photograph of us in Cuba. And I have to say, I took this photograph. It is extremely difficult. It's like herding cats to get a crowd of very happy, fairly wealthy people all together in one go. We also had family tours. In fact, we were the only organization doing patron tours for children. And we went to Rome, Cairo and Luxor, Athens, Hadrian's Wall, and Viking Denmark. Here's a picture I took outside the pyramids and the Sphinx. We'd actually taken this toilet paper with us in order to undergo these children with an Egyptian mummification ritual. The tourists nearby were amazed. What general lessons have I learned from the type of work I've done overseas for culture? First of all, that desk research plus face-to-face research is absolutely essential for understanding cultural differences. You need to be very respectful of cultural and religious differences, political differences. Don't be opportunist. Don't just pretend to be on their side. They'll see through you and you will feel uncomfortable. You need to learn from your mistakes. You will make mistakes, and don't be embarrassed to get things wrong. And it's better to be cautiously neutral to avoid the pitfalls, but don't be boring either. Do your homework about people, places, and things, but ask your donors and supporters about their views on their culture, and don't show off. And lastly, don't be afraid of asking for support, but get advice from what I call a wise old owl, somebody who knows the culture, knows the organization, to see whether it's culturally appropriate for you yourself to ask, and also about the timing of asking. Now, the main part of my presentation today for IFAB Online is a case study in raising funds with China-related cultural artifacts. And I want to share this experience with you as I believe it crystallizes many of these general lessons from other organizations and countries I've worked in. Now, many of you here at IFAB may have a variety of experiences in China-related fundraising. Maybe you're working in mainland China or in Hong Kong. Maybe you're partnering with UK organizations in China or Hong Kong, or maybe you support Chinese and Hong Kong cultural projects in the UK or elsewhere. Maybe you're working with Chinese communities and organizations in the UK or elsewhere, or do you just want to assess the opportunities and the risks of working in China-related fundraising? Now, there will be some general lessons for all of you in this case study of the Terracotta Warriors exhibition in National Museums, Liverpool, 2017 to 18. I hope you find it useful. And it would be good to know in the question and answer session afterwards and in your feedback to the organizers, what do you think are the biggest issues in China-related fundraising? I'm going to tell you mine. Please let me know yours. So let's just talk about the whole background in China to philanthropy and sponsorship. In summary, between 2010 and 2016, donations from the top 100 philanthropists in mainland China totaled $4.6 billion. And annual donations from all sources to charities in China grew from 10 billion renminbi to 100 billion renminbi between 2009 and 2018. Interestingly, 80% of donations in China come from corporations, and the majority of Chinese philanthropy is focused inside China, not outside it. And on the cultural side, it's really important to realize there has been an enormous growth in museums in China, across China, many of them privately, philanthropically sponsored. And China is set to be the leading global center for art. For instance, the Centre Pompidou set up the West Bund Museum project in Shanghai in 2019. However, there are also very large UK organizations involved in China, and I'm just going to highlight three of them. First of all, the Victoria and Albert Museum, the world's #1 design museum. Secondly, the University of Liverpool, and obviously that's important in terms of the terracotta warriors. And thirdly, the University of Nottingham. Now, the universities of Nottingham and Liverpool have campuses in mainland China, and also 5,000 students for China are actually based in Liverpool. The Victoria and Albert Museum has had major engagement for years in many areas, and that includes, between 2005 and 2013, 5 major exhibitions with China-related themes, and in China itself, more than 13 exhibitions. Strong commercial and diplomatic relationships, including the UK-China cultural exchange, alongside the British Library, the British Museum, and the Tate in 2016. And Travel with the V&A program organized a 2010 trip to China for museum supporters led by V&A curators. I don't know the details of that, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if it's not that dissimilar to the Museum of London tours that I've already told you about. Now, this is the China's First Emperor and the Terracotta Warriors front page branding, and I'll also show you, this is the wonderful catalogue of the exhibition, richly illustrated with the fantastic artifacts. I'll tell you more about the artifacts in a minute. For those of you who don't know, China was united under the first emperor of the Qin dynasty. And there were about 7 kingdoms that he conquered and brought together. And his tomb at Xi'an is probably the #1 archaeological discovery of the 20th century. Now, why Liverpool? Well, Liverpool has a very long relationship to China. Liverpool is the site of the oldest Chinese community in Europe. From the 1840s onwards, there would be Chinese sailors coming to Liverpool in the boats of the Liverpool China merchants. Many of them settled down, and over years, the community grew. This is the actual imperial arch built in the early 20th century, the early 21st century in Liverpool's Chinatown, and it's probably the largest imperial arch outside China, and maybe it's bigger than many of those inside China. Look at the difference. Can you tell the difference between Shanghai's waterfront on the Bund and Liverpool's waterfront? On the left-hand side, we have the Bund in Shanghai, and on the right, we have Liverpool's waterfront. There's some interesting differences and some interesting similarities there. And inside our, that is National Museum's Liverpool, Museum of Liverpool, one of the main museums of the National Museum Group. We actually have a Shanghai, China, Liverpool gallery, and it's full of artifacts that the China merchants brought back from the Far East into Liverpool, but also it has wonderful displays about the lives and history of the Chinese community in Liverpool. And this is World Museum, which is probably the most important museum in the National Museum's Liverpool group. And World Museum is where the Terracotta Warriors exhibition opened in February 2018, and it closed in October 2018. Now, what did we actually get with the Terracotta Warriors exhibition? Every year, China sends 2 terracotta warriors exhibitions around the world. Well, I doubt if they're doing that this year, but before 2020. One circulates in Asia, and the other one circulates in Europe and the Americas, and also Africa. The Chinese authorities give you 2 basic choices for the type of exhibition you want. Do you want one that's concentrated on the terracotta warrior's tomb, or do you want a broader historical one? National Museums of Liverpool chose the broader historical one. So we in our exhibition showed the whole history that led up to the unification of China by the Qin emperor, and then the collapse of the Qin dynasty and the rise of the Han dynasty. Because what's interesting about the Han dynasty is that it took over all of the structures, the legal and cultural artifacts and policies of the Qin. And in fact, what we think of as Chinese culture today was defined by Han culture. So our exhibition spanned 700 or so years. It typified what everybody thinks is Chinese culture. And this is an interesting point, because the Chinese Communist Party see the terracotta warriors exhibitions going around the world as an aspect of their soft power, and actually talking about what it is to be Chinese. And this picture, for instance, is of the golden horse of Mao Ling, and it was a late arrival in the exhibition, which is quite exciting because we could have a second private view for when it arrived. We had the most fantastic success in this exhibition. We had 605,000 visitors. This was far and away the largest exhibition that National Museums of Liverpool had ever had, more than double the size. You can see the statistics there. I'll point you to the bubble in the bottom right-hand corner. 31,119 replica warriors were sold, but 10 full-size replicas were sold in the shop for £1,200 each. Goodness gracious. And we had an absolute blitz on media coverage, on press and publicity in general. And on top of that, through working with a wonderful marketing and communications team of about 3 people nearly all the time, we got fantastic social media and other coverage. So for instance, 6.5 million people reached on social media. These are all important aspects of how the museum was successful and why it wanted to do this, and why fundraising to support it was also important. Now, this is me. And I'm not showing you just a photograph of me for the sake of myself, because you can see me on the screen. But this is me the day before the exhibition opened. I was privileged enough to be in a completely empty gallery, apart from the person taking the photograph. And here are 7 of the 10 warriors that were in the exhibition. China only ever allowed 10 warriors out at one time. We had about 120 objects. As I said, they stretched from what's called the Warring Kingdoms period right up to the Han Dynasty, but the center was this display. You will not see this type of display again, because unfortunately, only 2 months before we opened our exhibition at the Franklin Museum in Philadelphia, a Christmas reveler broke across the barrier and snapped off one of the terracotta warriors' fingers in that exhibition in Philadelphia, to absolute uproar and outrage. He was arrested. He actually took the finger home, and he's had two trials, and his retrial has been postponed because of coronavirus. And in a nutshell, the museum is Franklin Museum, I'm sure if I haven't got the name quite right, is in a dispute over $4.5 million with the Chinese archaeological authorities over this finger. So here you could almost touch the terracotta warriors. You will not be able to do that again, sadly. So let's look at planning the exhibition. This was a long and convoluted process. The informal agreement started in early 2015. Then we recruited a Chinese consultant to manage the relationships on the ground in Xi'an, where the terracotta warriors are. His involvement was absolutely critical, but I have to say, although it couldn't have been done without him, it's a very, very, very expensive process. We're talking about a six-figure process to get a consultant to make this work, but we couldn't have done it without him. The choice of artifacts for loan was unfortunately only finalized in summer 2017, and the Chinese authorities prohibited any publicity whatsoever on the specific objects until the export license was agreed. And that wasn't agreed to the end of the year. So this was very challenging for producing fundraising materials. As an example, we were all ready to film a video with interviews and images that we thought were all right, but we got the thumbs down on that and we weren't allowed to do it. And the formal agreement for the exhibition, although it's made in November 2016, and I was recruited in December 2016 and started working in February 2017, 11 days a month till February 2018, that's not a long time for a museum to organize an exhibition of this scale and for fundraising to take place. These were very short timescales. Most exhibitions of this scale would have 2 years lead time, at least. So in summary, there was no advanced fundraising preparation. There had been nobody running the NML development department since 2015, and the NML, that's National Museums in Liverpool, decided not to undertake any preparation work for a fundraising campaign until the contract for the exhibition was signed off with China in November 2016. Now, what was the result of that lack of advanced preparation? First of all, there was no fundraising case for support ready to be used. Secondly, there was no preparatory prospect research undertaken. Thirdly, no market testing of donors to agree an achievable fundraising target. Fourthly, no volunteer fundraising committee set up. And lastly, no effective coordination with other major Liverpool cultural events taking place in 2018. There were two big events taking place in 2018. Therefore, there's an immediate lesson to be learned. Major exhibition fundraising must be planned well in advance, even with the risk that the exhibition itself will not take place. Given the complexities involved with fundraising around a China project, the need for advanced planning is more acute than usual. I would say it would have been the right thing to have started fundraising preparation 6 months before the contract was signed. If it didn't happen, it didn't happen, but it would have been better to have done it then. This is one of the rooms that we used during the exhibition that was refurbished in the run-up to the exhibition. This is the entrance to the old technical school, which is now part of World Museum. It's a beautiful marble Edwardian gallery, and we use this for dinners and for receptions. And here we've colored it, we've lit it with Chinese red. We engaged with lots of organizations involved with China, and here's the types of organizations we engaged with. Chinese companies doing business in the UK and their Chinese or UK senior staff, the Chinese embassy in order to give a lead to China-oriented businesses to support the exhibition, the Chinese consulate in Manchester with their influence over Chinese communities in the Northwest, the Chinese communities themselves in the Liverpool City region, not just in Liverpool, UK-based organizations working with China to promote China-UK trade and investment, and the UK government, especially Digital Culture, Media and Sport, DCMS, and the supporters of the Great Britain campaign. And last but certainly not least, the UK Embassy and the British Council itself in Beijing. Just to show you, these are a couple of our major donors. On the left is Wendy Wu of Wendy Wu Travel, and in the middle is the senior representative of Tianjin Airlines in the UK. We also therefore look for UK supporters. We look for UK businesses already working in China, individuals and businesses who wanted an opportunity to get involved with China, UK donors who had links with China, charitable trusts, companies and individuals, and existing National Museums of Liverpool supporters, and Liverpool-based companies who wanted connections to a major public relations and educational success story in their own city. In total, we had a prospect list of approximately 200 companies, trusts, and individuals. This is one of my favorite photographs, actually. It's not particularly relevant, but I like to put it in because this is on the private view, and it shows the then Culture Secretary but it shows 4 mayors of the Merseyside region, all with their chains of office. And I invented a collective noun for mayors, a clanking of mayors. I loved it. So what was successful in the campaign? First of all, we raised 450,000 plus. That included Tianjin Airlines, the largest NML sponsor ever. We deepened relations with Unilever and with Swire, which was actually founded in Liverpool. We effectively used the high-level contacts of the museum's director, the executive director, and key trustees. One in particular, who was the trustee responsible for fundraising, Ian Rosenblatt. We created new relationships inside and outside Merseyside for subsequent follow-up. We transformed, I would say, NML senior staff and trustees' perception of fundraising. We put donor and sponsor relations center stage around providing benefits and recognition. We created a group of trustees actively involved in fundraising throughout most of the progress of the campaign. And we engaged external campaign ambassadors to work at a senior level. We raised the ambitions of the development team alongside the growth of its longer-term strategy. I'll come on to that a bit later. The whole thing, I would say, was a step change in National Museum Liverpool fundraising, side by side with the highest profile exhibition ever. And just to show you, in fact, in our exhibition catalogue, we have all the major donors and sponsors listed. So we had headline partners, keynote partners, major partners, and terracotta warriors partners. Headline partners were around £200,000 up. Keynote partners were about £100,000 plus up. Major partners were about £50,000 plus up. And terracotta warrior partners were £10,000, 25,000. So you can see from here, actually, there weren't a great number of actual donors and sponsors. Each one of them took a lot of work. And of course, there were others who supported at a lower level as well. But one of the most important things I'd like to say in this presentation for IFAB, there are 4 big challenges relating to China-related organizations that hampered us from being even more successful than we might have been. Challenge number 1, the process of getting the final agreement for the exhibition severely hampered our fundraising opportunities. The Chinese cultural attaché had told us when he came around the museum in August 2017 that the embassy would be very pleased to give active support to get businesses to support us, but only once the export license was granted. Now, we were on a knife edge for several months. That was August 2017. The license only arrived in December 2017, believe it or not, 2 months before opening. The late delivery of the export license completely scuppered us getting formal endorsement from the embassy amongst Chinese UK companies in time for the start of the exhibition. And 2 volunteer campaign ambassadors stressed to us that we must get embassy support before approaching China-oriented companies. This is a very interesting one that I've reflected on a lot. As a result, we spent a great deal of time and held back from making some independent contacts because of concern that we would be rebuffed without the embassy's support. Should we have taken a more independent view and taken greater risks? That's an interesting question. Challenge number 2 was that political sensitivities around the museum's collection posed what I can only describe as an existential threat to the exhibition. Now, Tibetan displays in the World Museum in Liverpool are amongst the most important outside Tibet. And there is amongst them a prominent visual reference to the Dalai Lama and that describes the Chinese state as an occupier. These are descriptions and exhibition displays that go back, I suspect, 10, 15 more years. National Museums Liverpool decided that it was not appropriate to act in advance on the prior concerns that 3 of us expressed, a trustee, a senior staff member, and myself, about mitigating the risk of the exhibition by these particular positions on Tibet and China. In early January 2018, that's shortly after we received the export license, we had a visit by the Manchester Chinese vice consul and his assistant to see these displays. I can only describe this as one of the two most embarrassing moments of my whole 30-year fundraising career. We showed the Manchester Chinese vice consul and his assistant round, and we'd been talking in English to them, and I could see we were approaching this particularly sensitive and quite challenging display about the Chinese in Tibet. The Chinese vice consul and his assistant stopped talking English and started talking Chinese and taking notes for 5 minutes. We then came back to the director's office, where we received a lecture, actually, where we were given books on Tibet and China, which we should read. And the Chinese vice consul said that these exhibitions cannot be opened during the exhibition. The implied threat was that if you do open them, we will not send you the terracotta warriors. Now, NML had to balance its own independence and its collecting and displays policies against the danger that the whole exhibition might be pulled. We'd already spent an enormous amount of money, time, staff resource, and done a lot of fundraising to get where we'd got to. Because the world culture, however, was already overdue for refurbishment and a redisplay, it was therefore closed for the duration of the exhibition. This was a decision with internal risks, but it actually didn't create any public disapproval. But it was, I have to say, touch and go. Third challenge was working with our lead Chinese partner in what I can describe as an opaque and time-consuming decision-making process. Tianjin Airlines was a key supporter, but their own marketing needs changed frequently, and while we engaged with the UK team, we were prevented from directly contacting the decision makers in China. They had a provisional agreement on the partnership, which was substantially delayed by alterations outside our control, and in fact, probably outside their control, to airline licenses allocated by the Chinese government. And then in the UK, Tianjin Airlines decided to move its hub from London Gatwick to London Heathrow. Lots of change, and subsequently a new senior management in China ratcheted up to a much tougher negotiating stance with frequent changes, referring back to changes in their operational policy as a result of Chinese government decisions. The initial approach to Tianjin Airlines took place in April 2017, but the partnership was only finalized, signed, cashed through the door in October 2018, which is at the end of the display, at the end of the exhibition, despite the airline being prioritized in all publicity before and after the opening. As a result, the financial agreement was financially much lower than initially discussed. It still ended up as the largest single NML sponsorship at £215,000. But the lesson here is dealing with a company, even a Chinese company based in the UK, which is controlled by China, and having to deal with emails with China and with emails and meetings in the UK is difficult. It is not an easy process. Challenge number 4, 2 parallel NML fundraising strategies hampered major gift engagement with China. The Terracotta Warriors campaign was set up in early 2017 specifically, not only to raise money for the Terracotta Warriors, but to be an engine of growth for major donors, for major gift fundraising, with me as campaign director. But later on in 2017, the NML board endorsed a parallel strategy led by the new director of development, Andrew Evans, a very, very good strategy. And by the way, Andrew and I worked very closely on the whole campaign, and he has endorsed much of what has been said today in this presentation. He had been tasked to set out a long-term operational base, which included strengthening revenue fundraising and revitalizing membership. But, there was a strategy mismatch between the major gifts and the revenue fundraising strategy, and that ended up dispelling senior management enthusiasm for what I considered would be a groundbreaking exhibition partnership with Wendy Wu Travel. This would have developed a Patrons Tour to China program based on my Museum of London experience of major gift growth, which would have used the experience of NML in China to grow not only major donors, but also mid-level donors, and then to be replicated later on with other exhibitions. So, sadly, competing strategies implemented by the same development team, reporting into two separate people, ended up with a missed opportunity and a bemused sponsor. I cannot go into extreme details about how that happened. All I can say is that didn't happen with the active agreement of either myself or Andrew Evans. I think it was more about the fact that it just happened. So those are the challenges. What are the lessons that have been learned? Much of what we did was under Theresa May's government and their rapprochement with China, following on in particular from Cameron's visit with the chairman Xi. Lesson number one, Western-oriented fundraising needs to develop a radically different cultural approach when dealing with fundraising around China. We're working within a highly centralized and hierarchical economic and political system, and that results in the more junior levels not wanting to lose face in delivering messages from their senior levels to sponsors and donors and to clients, in effect, like ourselves. This can make it very difficult for Western-oriented fundraisers to judge discussions, negotiations, and outcomes accurately. Western-oriented fundraisers need to receive specific training in understanding Chinese political and business cultural practice. We did receive some, but had to learn most of it on the job. And as I've described in terms of the whole issue around not having the embassies public support us in terms of getting businesses on board because we didn't have the export license, it can be a real challenge. I'll throw in here, because it refers to the next point, two of the wonderful and senior members of the Chinese community in Liverpool on the day that we gave an hour and a half's preview of the opening, and everybody got a special ticket on the day, which they're showing there. Lesson number two is you need to make friends with China watchers and with Chinese communities in your own country. We engaged with the China-Britain Business Council, and we recruited campaign ambassadors who were working for Chinese companies. Each of them helped us greatly in contacts and in business etiquette. In order to ensure that National Museums of Liverpool staff engaged in the best possible way with Chinese business people and Liverpool Chinese communities, we arranged Chinese cultural awareness training from a local Merseyside Chinese community leader, and we did the following. We engaged with 18 community organizations in a special exhibition preview a month or two before the exhibition opened. We involved Liverpool Chinese school children and cultural organizations in the private view, including a wonderful dragon dance. We held a special viewing for Merseyside Chinese community leaders on the opening morning in advance to the general public, which I've just told you about. We didn't assume that the Chinese community in our city was monolithic. For a start, there are 5,000 mainland Chinese students there, and there is a Confucius Institute in the University of Liverpool. We didn't assume that they were monolithic, especially in their political views. They were not, but all of them were immensely proud of the exhibition. And here is a picture of the Chinese ambassador on the opening afternoon tea. We actually had 3 events on the opening day. We had a lunch, an afternoon tea, and then the evening private view, which was very, very, very crowded. Lesson number 3. An extremely robust but pragmatic ethical stance is required. Yes, 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 yes. Engaging with the Chinese archaeological authorities at Xi'an was in effect a government-to-government issue. In our campaign brochure, which is here, we featured the then UK Cultural Secretary Karen Bradley in Xi'an with the authorities side by side with our executive director. We were invited to Lancaster House in December 2017 Lancaster House, for those who don't know about it, is in effect the main government high status reception centre in London. We were invited to Lancaster House for the people-to-people discussions between the UK and China. We actually had an exhibition stand there, and the exhibition was lauded by senior UK politicians and Chinese government officials. Whilst we worked closely with the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport and with the British Embassy in China, we actually felt unable, the leadership of this campaign in NML, to share our concerns about our Tibetan displays with them. We felt that DCMS would then have been obliged, if we'd shared that information or our concerns, to bring that issue into government-to-government relations between the UK and China. We felt that we couldn't take that chance. My general conclusion and the lesson is to raise funds around Chinese artifacts. UK cultural organizations should really try to avoid commenting on all the things that we in the UK may not like about what we consider often a repressive regime. We should concentrate instead on the positive benefits of sharing cultural treasures between the countries. So, what is the future for China-related fundraising? There are increasing opportunities for cultural fundraising because of the growth of China, in particular the traveling and culture-consuming classes. China's policy of investment in its Belt and Road program is making China ever more influential globally. They're using soft power really effectively, in particular in Asia and in Africa. UK collections have got wonderful Chinese collections. And as I've already told you about the NML's Tibetan collection, but also in our Lady Lever Art Gallery and in our Museum of London, we've got extensive collections. And we want to share them, and we want to share our own cultural performances with China and vice versa. And it's very interesting that the Chinese archaeological authorities, when they came over from Xi'an and looked at the almost finished exhibition, told us that our virtual reality recreation of the first emperor's tomb was something that they could learn from. Should we be concerned about the ethical questions? And I've headlined this and underlined it. Do we avoid fundraising links with China, or do we continue to engage with them? We are no longer in the post-Tiananmen Square era when everyone wanted to do business with China. Under Chairman Xi Jinping, the Chinese Communist Party has tightened its control in all areas of public life and in presentation of policy. And as a consequence, there are 5 major areas of concern that could affect UK-Chinese fundraising. I'd like to ask you, do they affect you too? These 5 areas are democracy in Hong Kong, and any coercion, for instance, of Chinese students in the UK, and the question of the future emigration of British national overseas citizens who have all been granted right of abode in the UK if the situation becomes difficult in Hong Kong for them. The situation of the Uyghur Muslim minority people and the education camps in which I believe 1 million have been imprisoned, supposedly re-educated. This is an open wound, and this is a really live issue that will not go away. Slightly to one side, but important in terms of the whole US-UK relationship, is Huawei and the questions of UK national security and the US opposition, and in fact now Britain's acquiescence in effect opposing the ongoing development of Huawei in the UK. It's interestingly that we discussed briefly Huawei, and I'm very glad actually that we didn't get into lots of discussions with Huawei in the exhibition. There is, of course, the long-term global impact of coronavirus if it encourages Trump-style Sinophobia, hatred of China. I am actually making this presentation, recording it on the morning after voting in the US election. I have no idea what the result will be, but regardless of the result in the US election, whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden, the canary is already outside the cage and is trumpeting Sinophobia. And then there's also the long arm of censorship. Only very recently, this year, a French museum in Nantes in Brittany cancelled an exhibition on Genghis Khan because the Chinese authorities wanted it to censor language describing Mongols in Mongolia. That's another sensitive issue. So I would say, in summary, let's get real. What should our attitude be? The Chinese government and cultural authorities, in my view, do sincerely want external approval from foreign governments, their audiences, from businesses and donors, such as the Terracotta Warriors exhibition that Traveling the World produced. But the simple fact is they do not need this external approval. Institutions and fundraisers in the UK and elsewhere who want a continuing China link in this new world do have many things to learn and to teach and to share. But the relationship is not now and is unlikely to be in the future one of equal partners. If we want to work with them, they are in the driving seat. And I think the example that I gave of the visit of the Chinese vice consul, where we were told that we couldn't open our gallery during the exhibition, is a good example of that. So in summary and finally, for each fundraiser and for each cultural organization, you will have to decide on the best path for you personally, your trustees, your organization, your audiences. But you need to debate these issues inside your organizations, as they will be of increasing importance, learning from others' experience. If you can't fundraise effectively by knowing and having confidence in the organizations and the country from which you're fundraising, and you can't give that confidence to your organizational leaders, in my view, you cannot do effective fundraising. This is not I'm not a prophet of doom here. I'm being realistic. I'm saying, let's continue. Let's become realistic. Let's understand the different power relations, but let's change the way we do some things to make sure that we can be as effective as possible. Thank you so much. And I look forward very much to having the questions and answer sessions and also dealing with the feedback, which I understand is over the next 12 months. I do hope you've had a great time, learnt a lot on IFAB online. See you next year. Bye-bye.